Hey everybody, Rob here with Washington State Funeral Directors Association. As you know, as the world knows, we've all been affected by the COVID-19 virus. Um, Here in Washington State, we've been dubbed by many people as ground zero for the country, and I've received many phone calls from all over the country and all over the world asking what is happening in Washington. How are funeral providers handling the COVID virus? And so we wanted to talk with you a little bit today about that. We're going to be sharing some information and some ideas with you. We were planning to talk with Sharon G. Mascarello, from Wayne State University, but unfortunately, her family has had a loss. And so I want to just, on behalf of WSFDA, express our deepest condolences to her and to her family. We are going to continue with this conversation, though, as we've invited Dominick Astorino, also from Wayne State University, to join us. And so we'll be talking with him today. And hopefully this is some information that will be helpful to you. Hopefully it will provide you with some opportunities to serve families better, as well as opportunities to protect yourself during this time. So stay tuned. We'll be with you momentarily with Dominick Astorino. Hey everybody, it's Rob again. It's time for another 5-minute member talk. Today's a little bit special because it is Friday the 13th, and we're dropping a member talk with you today because we want to discuss the COVID-19 epidemic that we have right now. As I said in the opening trailer, we've got with us today Dominick Astorino. Hi Dominick, how are you today?
Good. Hello. How are you?
Hi. Good. So many people that watch this may know who you are, but I just want to touch base because there's going to be a lot of people that might not know who you are. Some even folks that are not in the funeral profession. Dominick is a instructor. You're a professor teaching restorative art at two different mortuary colleges. Wayne State University in Detroit and Worsham College, or online through Worsham College in Chicago. Is that right?
That's right. Yep.
And you've got degrees in cellular biology and as well a mortuary science degree.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, that's great. Happy to have you on here. I know that you've been very busy. You just came off a big trip to Africa.
Yeah,
Particularly Kenya, wasn't it?
that's right. Yeah, and a lot of your members out there in Washington help support get me there. So thanks to all of you for watching this.
Yeah, we've got a few that were definitely a part of that, and what a great experience though for you and an opportunity to teach. Because just tell us real quickly. I know it's not why we were going to talk with you, but tell us real quickly what that project is and why you were a part of that.
The 10-second version, it was an effort to bring a standard of care, a mortuary standard of care, to a really underprivileged nation and mortuary care workers who are getting sick and even dying because of the spread of communicable disease over there. So it was a project 2 years in the making, and it finally came to fruition. And as you just said, I just got back maybe 2 weeks ago or so.
I know I had heard on some of the different podcasts and things, and it took a lot to get you there, especially inoculations. You had to do quite a few of those.
A lot of shots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was there any sort of getting back in, especially now with, you were kind of just before the real big outbreak in the United States for the coronavirus, but was there any real concerns of getting back into country following
Uh,
that?
no, when I laid over in Europe, and both in Europe and then when I arrived in Africa, everyone had to have their temperature taken upon exit of the plane. And if you had a fever, then I assume you had to go to a special room, but I didn't, so I just walked right through. But that
You
was
were
the
good
only
to
thing that I saw. I had no delay.
Yeah, good, good. Well, welcome back. Certainly a very honorable and well-deserved program. Happy that it's working out, and I'm assuming will continue to
Thanks.
work. So, um, we wanted to talk a little bit. As we said before, I've had multiple conversations with people from all over the country, all over the world that have called questions about what's happening in the state of Washington. The coronavirus has been kind of, well, I should say Washington has been sort of dubbed the ground zero for
Hmm.
COVID-19, um, primarily on the west side of the state. The east side of our state doesn't really have a whole lot of issue at this point, but people have been calling left and right, asking for ideas, asking for thoughts. What are we doing? Can we embalm? Can we not embalm? Can we have funerals? So let's dive into that, because there really hasn't been a whole lot of conversation that's out there as of yet, and hopefully you can share some thoughts with us on that. So the big
Yeah,
thing
sure.
is, do you or does the CDC, have they released what we're dealing with at this point? Obviously it's a virus, but do we have anything more than just that it's a virus affecting people that you're aware of?
We know, or the CDC knows, that it's a coronavirus. Viruses, just kind of similar to bacteria or other things, have different sorts of classifications. So we know that it's a coronavirus. I think we all know that by now. And coronaviruses can cause a certain number of diseases in humans. Probably the one that you and I are most familiar with before this came about was SARS.
Hmm.
So there's a definite classification of this type of virus based on how it's shaped, how it's structured, and how it reacts to certain things, and also how it's destroyed.
So the big question that I'm getting quite a bit of is, as funeral service providers, as funeral service practitioners, what do we need to be doing to protect ourselves? What do we need to be doing to protect the public? I guess the very first one, the first question I have is, when we get that phone call at the funeral home that says somebody's passed away and they're requesting that
Mhm.
we bring this person into our care, how should we be handling that process?
Well, before we even answer that, I think the most fundamental thing to do is for everyone to just calm down and not panic, and remember that if you're a licensed funeral director or embalmer, you're already prepared for this. You've already gone through the education. We've taken microbiology, we've studied pathology, we've studied the transmission of disease, and we know inside and out about personal protection. And so we have to rely on basic principles to see us through scarier times. When you're talking about a specific virus and how it spreads, the most important thing I think for us to understand is, how does this virus get from one person to another? Um, and stop looking on Facebook or social media or chats at the corner cafe on how this spreads, and actually look at the science of it from a reputable source. This virus spreads through droplets, through moisture in our nose or in our mouth. It's not there's no documented cases that the CDC have found where you can touch something inanimate like a coffee mug or a tabletop or a pen, and now you somehow magically have this thing. So if you consider just that, again, that basic fundamental fact that this virus that's making people sick is spread through droplet contamination. In other words, you sneeze, you cough, you spit, and then it goes into someone else's nose or mouth. And then you think about the deceased in your funeral home. If they did have this virus inside their body, how is it going to logically spread to the general public if it's spread airborne through droplets coming out of a nose or a mouth? It would be pretty much impossible. There is a great concern, I think, with the mortuary care workers who are responding to the nursing homes or the homes or the hospitals to transfer these decedents into our care.
Mhm.
Um, but it really comes down to basics. Protect yourself from the possibility of aerosol droplets entering your mouth or your nose.
Yeah.
Place the decedent in a body bag so that their mouth and nose is covered. Wear gloves. Wash your hands. When you transfer the remains from a cot to something else, or from a bed to a cot, or however you're moving them, maybe cover your nose and your mouth and wear gloves. This virus spreads only one way, and it can only enter our body one way. So if we can restrict that, then we're ahead of the curve.
Well, that's great advice. And I love that we started that with calm down and don't panic, because I think we're in a state right now where we do see a lot of panic, primarily because of misinformation that is out there, particularly in social media sites, and like you say, the corner cafe. People are referring to that more than they are the actual science of it. So, in referencing the CDC guidelines, which the last one I have came out on March 11th, so just 2 days ago. So it's still fairly new. I haven't seen any new updates. They asked, they've received many questions. And these are questions that I've received. Can we have a funeral? Do we have to avoid contact with the deceased? Can we have viewing? But it sounds like, based off what you're saying, that as far as the visitation or the viewing of the deceased, there shouldn't
Absolutely.
be any sort of there shouldn't be any sort of real issue with that process.
No, the only issue that you would encounter isn't going to come from the deceased. It's going to come from a large gathering of people in the public in a closed space. So a lot of states, provinces, including my own here in Michigan, have as recently as today, limited the number of people allowed at a public gathering. Here in Michigan, it's 250.
Yeah.
Um, at our funeral home and other funeral homes, I believe there's courteous signs posted and worded however you see fit about avoiding personal contact because of what's going on, hugging, kissing, shaking hands. But that's the real threat here. Again, this virus spreads through respiratory droplets, and
Mm.
as anyone knows, the deceased isn't producing those at all. So
Okay.
there shouldn't be. In fact, if you read the CDC guidelines for the handling of post-mortem examination of remains,
Right.
it pretty clearly says there's almost no risk except for things that the operator can do to generate aerosol contamination, like the use of a bone saw. Or um, I did read an article that had a valid point about when we transfer remains, don't be shaking the clothing or the blanket or the sheets, just dispose them, because if there was a droplet on the clothing and you're shaking them rigorously, it could potentially spread a droplet. But other than that, it should be standard operating procedure if you're employing PPEs as you should every day.
What would your thoughts be on, and I've heard some folks say this, of when you get to the bedside or where the deceased is, actually placing a barrier mask of some sort on the deceased prior to transporting or moving them from that bedside to your cot or gurney, just because that motion can expel air from the lungs if there's any trap. Do
Yeah.
you think that's a good idea to maybe
Yes.
look at doing that as well?
Yes, and in fact, it's not a terrible idea to employ that tactic on all transfers for, the next maybe 2, 3 weeks until the
Yeah.
CDC tells us things are starting to settle down. Because if an unembalmed remains has the virus in the lungs or the respiratory tract, then the physical movement of unembalmed remains could manipulate the expulsion into the air. And it's not that uncommon if you travel internationally, or you deal with mortuary care situations similar to what I just did in Africa. It's not uncommon to place a barrier mask on the deceased for that very reason.
Yeah. And I've heard some folks say, well, we don't want to be disrespectful to the family that's in the room. I think really what this boils down to is just open communication with the family, and just expressing this is what we need to do to protect ourselves. Not
Right.
that we have any assumptions of your loved one, but we have to assume that everybody has something, and the personal protective equipment that we put on is used to protect us. Does that
Yeah.
sound fair?
Uh, well, yeah, you or I or anyone out in Washington or anywhere else has never felt the need to explain to a family why we wear gloves on a transfer.
Right.
We're not making faulty assumptions. We're protecting ourselves. We're protecting them. We're protecting everyone.
Yeah.
That's just how it needs to be.
So, going back to that CDC report of March 11, the statement in there, according to the CDC, people that die of or are suspected of dying of COVID-19 can safely be transported and embalmed. I think that's a statement that needs to be made, more than just on a document, but we actually need to state that, because that is a question that I'm hearing pretty regularly. I'm assuming you are as well,
Right.
as an embalming instructor, of how do we do this. We can safely embalm. Do you know of any of the chemicals that we use in the embalming that currently would, or you think would potentially kill the virus?
Yeah. So again, the this virus is classified as a coronavirus, which is these classifications in microbiology are based on the shape and structure of the virus itself. And this particular one is a sphere, and it's got like a force field around it made out of oil. Well, soap destroys that force field. That's why we're reading and hearing so often, wash your hands with soap and water, wash your hands with soap and water. Because the way this virus infects us is when you inhale it, that soapy force field embeds itself in the mucous membranes in your nose and your throat and your lungs. So if you
Gotcha.
can destroy that force field, it can't embed itself, you're going to be fine. The EPA, the CDC, they've released a list of uh, current on the market chemicals that are proven and known to destroy this force field. Most common is Clorox, just regular bleach,
Hmm.
soap and water. So it's not like you're not going to have to be a chemist or hire a chemist to get these things. You can probably get them easier than you can get toilet paper right now if you just go to the store. It's just soap, water, bleach. I haven't seen a report or read a report yet about the effects of formaldehyde. Um, but I would have to think that it would at least render it inactive, especially for the embalmers out there. When you get to the aspiration, pay special attention to the lungs and to the area of the trachea, because that's where
Right.
this thing is living. And use a higher index cavity fluid perhaps when you inject into the lungs in that area.
Right.
Again, not that this virus can be expelled really from an already embalmed person, but it certainly can't hurt. We should be using cavity fluid anyway, but maybe just spend an extra few minutes or an extra thought on these areas.
Sure. Yeah. So just, and moving forward with that thought of, after the embalming, the visitation, the funeral itself, at least surrounding the deceased, not the gathering of people, but at least pertaining to the deceased. The CDC puts it right there. There's currently no risk associated with being in the same room at a funeral or visitation with the body of somebody who died of COVID.
Yeah,
They
that's
are,
exactly right.
yeah, they're saying, we should consider letting family members know it's probably not a good idea to touch. I don't know if that's what they put as a recommendation, but based off what you're saying, I don't know that that would even be a real factor if proper embalming has been performed, and being that this is an aerosol virus. Do you
Yeah, I
think?
mean, you again, if you have people gathered at the visitation or at the funeral and you're touching things with your hands, you still have a risk, because if you're there and you cough, and let's say you cough and you expel something even microscopic on the pray or the kneeler or on the register book stand or on the flower or wherever, and then I go up there and I'm saying a prayer on the kneeler and I touch that kneeler with my hands, that is airborne. That is droplet airborne aerosol. It came from you, and I've now picked it up.
Sure.
Just wash your hands. Don't. Not that we're all walking around funerals licking our hands and everything like that. Just be mindful. The soap destroys that oily force field around this thing. Wash your hands.
So, yeah, I mean, from day one as children, that's what we were taught. You wash your hands, you wash your hands, you wash your hands. And it seems like that's really the big answer at this point is continue to wash your hands, soap and water, um, hand sanitizer. The recommendation is 60% alcohol in a hand sanitizer or greater. But for me personally, I think soap and water is probably the best, just because you tend to not dry out so much
Sure.
with alcohol. Um, so we've kind of really touched on the deceased themselves, but there's another component to funerals, as we all know, and that's the living.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we've got the gathering situations, like you said, in where you're at, it's 25 or 250, excuse me, or less
Yeah.
people. Washington State has done that, has imposed that as well, but only in 3 counties, King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties at this point, gatherings of 250 or less. However, I've discovered and found that many places are being a little bit more proactive, which is really good to hear, and canceling all sorts of functions and events all over the state just because of this issue. Um, Obviously, we have to do our part.
Mm-hmm.
And our part is, if we know we're sick or we feel like we're sick, we should not attend functions with other people. But we can, like I say, we can only do our part of that. What are some options that you can think of that, if you can't attend somebody's funeral and the funeral's not going to be postponed, what are some options the funeral homes can do to look at allowing people to attend those? I mean, is there something that's being taught at the schools that we could all employ outside of the schools for attendance of funerals without actually being there?
Well, I think the most obvious is things like what you and I are doing right now, figuring out some way to webcast or broadcast these funerals, which a lot of funeral homes are already doing. Um, some places don't have the capabilities or the technology to do that. Um, Even something as simple as offering an online guest book through your funeral home website. It's not ideal. If you had a family member pass away and I wanted to attend, um, that's going to be the ultimate goal. But if situations prevent me and I can still log into a computer and type you a message, hey, Rob, I'm sorry. I wish I could have been there. You're going to see that. I mean, that's another alternative. But really, we live in an age where we pretty much all have phones or computers that can do. I mean, you're in Washington right now and I'm in Detroit and we're talking face to face. So even if the funeral home doesn't necessarily have the whole system set up, there's individuals there, whether it's an attendee, the funeral director, or whoever. Again, maybe not most ideal, but you could just hold your phone up and
Sure.
broadcast it to whoever's logging in or whoever you're sending it to.
Well, yeah, and definitely that's something that I was really wanting to touch base with, because I hear from people pretty regularly, well, we don't have that technology, or we
Hmm.
don't pay a company to do this. There are companies that you can pay to broadcast, and they do a great job. And there's also free services that maybe aren't as ideal, but there's so many different ways to get this information out there. And like you say, you're in Detroit, I'm in Washington right now, and other than a couple of little hit and misses with the internet there, we're doing pretty well on.
Hmm.
It's almost like I can well, I can see you face to face, so that's
Yeah.
actually pretty neat. um you know, a lot of people are choosing to postpone services, is another thing that's coming up, that we've seen a lot of people doing. um What else? I mean, is there anything else that you can think of that we could do just to get it out there? Let people know that there's some ideas. Not to say that we have to do these, but we want some ideas for people. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Just be the voice of reason in your community. I know a lot of you in Washington have heard me. I've been there before
Yeah.
and really liked it, by the way. Um,
Well, we might have to have you back
we,
out.
we are, whether you want to be or not, you are the local expert in your community when it comes to death, dying, the handling of remains. It doesn't take a PhD to be able to inform the public on just some of these basic ideas that we just talked about here today. So if people call your funeral home, and they will, if people stop you in the grocery store, and they will, and they ask you, speak up for what's right. No, you already know this information. You know that what we do in the funeral home as embalmers is beneficial to the public. We can argue day and night all we want about embalming and is it right or is it wrong, or this chemical or that chemical, but when it comes down to it, when there's a pandemic going across the globe like right now, you better believe that embalming is beneficial, whether it's to postpone the funeral so people can attend, or it's to stabilize the transmission of possible disease, preserve the deceased so the family has a chance to see them. What you're doing as embalmers in Washington and all over the country, if you're watching this, is being that expert and giving those families the chance to do whatever it is that they want. And that's what we need to remember, that's there's no one else they can call and ask right now. If you have a death, whether it's from COVID or uh, a heart attack or a car accident or whatever else, these families need us, and they're calling us because we answer, and that's our responsibility.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I want to kind of wrap everything up and recap. One big thing that I saw in the March 11 CDC update is towards the bottom. It says, as a funeral home owner, it's your responsibility to protect the health and welfare of your staff. And I truly agree with that, but I also think that we need to take it one step further and say that it's our own responsibility too to protect ourselves. And I think that's where we really need to focus on, like you say, wash your hands. That's the biggest contributing
Mm-hmm.
defense that we have for this right now. And so, you know, I love having you on here, and we are definitely going to get you back out to Washington for sure. Uh,
Anytime.
Yeah, but so Dominick, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for what you do, not only in Kenya, but in the different programs that I've seen you on. I've heard you on different podcasts, um, and it's just been great to sit down with you face to face and talk about this. So thank you for coming on today. And
You're welcome. Happy to
yeah,
help.
we'll real quick, just in case somebody does want to reach out to you, what would be a good email address that we could share with the public if they have additional questions for you?
The easiest one is just my last name, Astorino, Astorino at wayne.edu.
And that's for Wayne State University.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that'll go right to my office.
Awesome. That's great. Again, Dominick, thank you. It's a pleasure to talk with you. And we'll get this put out, and hopefully this will help answer some questions. Um, and I'd like to just say, just to reiterate what you said at the very beginning, find the information out through the scientific steps. Don't feed into the panic. Wash your hands. And we should see our way through this.
We will.
Thanks again, Dominick.
All right, take care.